Hi, I'm Tim, and welcome to the Chesler Sound Podcast. I have over a decade of experience working within audio, from music productions to podcasts to audio for film and video to even live events and anything in between. Yet there's still so much more I still need to learn from so many unique, interesting people behind those scenes. And I would like to share those people and their insights and their stories with you. So come with me and let's take a listen on what they have to say. Welcome to another episode of the Chesler Sound Podcast. With me today, I have Gregory. He's worked, decades behind the scenes of live sound, studio work, playing in big, small bands for blues and jazz all over St. Louis, and worked at Jazz St. Louis doing sound, lighting, camera work, you name it. He's done it all there. So without further ado, Gregory, welcome to the stage.
Hello, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to talk about some things. In particular, what got you started with jazz and music and audio and everything?
Well, as with most people of my generation, the baby boomers, it was the Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
Oh, yeah.
Watching the Beatles on black and white television. Really got a lot of people into music. Before that, my parents were of the World War II generation, and so we had a lot of jazz big band records around the house. So between the big band records and what you saw on TV in the 60s, there was a lot of rock and roll on TV. The Dick Clark American Bandstand show always had current top 40 acts on. The Tonight Show was always featuring the big bands, and you could always hear some great big band music on the Johnny Carson show. So once I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, it was like, oh, yeah, that's kind of cool. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household that had a piano, a baritone uke, and a classical guitar.
Huh. Okay.
So I first started off on the baritone uke, which fortunately is tuned like the high four strings of a guitar. So all the chords, cowboy chords as we like to call them, transferred right over to guitar when my hands got big enough to play a real guitar.
Oh, I feel that. It took me for a minute because I remember my father gave me the little guitar and I was like, that's not what I wanted. I waited until I got a little bigger before I got started.
Yeah. Then I got my first electric guitar. My mom bought me with S&H green stamps.
Oh, wow.
You got these stamps at the grocery store. You licked them, you put them in this book, and when you got enough stamps, you could buy something out of a catalog. And I said, I want that electric guitar.
They need to bring that back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you started with music, but what got you into audio, per se? Was it once you started playing out with friends and whatnot? Or?
Yeah, I grew up in a neighborhood where we had a bunch of kids in the neighborhood that were interested in music and guitar playing particularly, and we started our own little neighborhood garage band, and we found a drummer. And we were off to the races with the Dilbert Pickle Band.
A fantastic name.
Well, you had to pick a name. You got to have some sort of name. And so the audio kind of started within the band itself, where we needed microphones to try to sing and play real songs. And so we started experimenting with, of course, the first thing we did was plug a high impedance mic into a guitar amp. So we finally were able to buy a PA system, a Gibson GSA 100 or something. Had two column speakers, had 4 10s in each column.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
I think we had 4 channels of microphones. Here again, these are unbalanced 1/4-inch microphone inputs. And I think we had a whole 100 watts of power.
That was a lot, right?
Yeah, that's how I got started in the sound of it.
So, as you got started in, and If I do remember correctly, you actually were starting to go into some studios at one point?
So I had a guitar player friend that lived in Chicago. I knew him. In fact, he was the other guitar player in the Dilbert Pickle Band. He moved to Chicago, and he started doing some part-time work at a recording studio in Chicago called Universal Sound. And it was part of Universal Pictures, the Hollywood movie people.
I was about to say, it sounded like Universal Studios, yeah.
Right. So, of course, he would slip in there at night and do stuff on his own, record stuff on his own. So he called me up in St. Louis and said, hey, you got to come up to Chicago. I got the keys to Universal Studios and Universal Sound, and we can go in there and play after hours. So I jumped on the Amtrak train with my Les Paul and I went up to Chicago. And first time you walk into a big commercial studio is just, it's awe-inspiring. It is just unbelievable. And to see, they had two studios there. They had a big room where they recorded orchestras, and then they had a small soundproof room, Studio B, that was the whole floating room with you close the door and your ears go, and believe me, it gets you. It closes the door. So we were able to play around in that studio for free, which was fun.
Yeah.
That was my first introduction in the studios. I get back to St. Louis and I'm still playing music. And a few years later, I was in a band called Austin Trotter that we did all original music. It was kind of jazz, fusion kind of stuff. Okay. And we started recording in commercial studios in St. Louis. And the main studio we recorded in was downtown St. Louis on Locust Street called Premier Sound. I think it was Premier Sound and Film Works. And it turns out the studio had a couple of audio studios and had a sound stage for TV broadcasts. Okay. And two TV shows that were done from this studio. One was, there again, I'm talking back in the late 60s, early 70s, from these TV shows. One was the Charlotte Peters show, which was a local talk show. The other was the studio segments of a national show called Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And that was a show about wildlife. And this guy, Marlon Perkins, that would take African safaris and film the animals. And this was a national sponsored show. Well, the studio segments were filmed in St. Louis at Premier Sound and Film Works down on Locust Street. And this was in the early 70s. And when I was there in the late 70s, the sets were still there.
Really? Like so everything?
Yeah, the sets. It was just a, if you ever seen any television sets, it was just a T wall. And one side was painted one color and one side was painted the other color. And they would shoot from the corners in, and they had two different sets, and it was really, really interesting.
Got to see the magic behind the
exactly. See the man behind the curtain. But that was real interesting, and the sound studio was neat because that was the first one that I really spent a lot of time in as a musician, and it had you see some of these things. There's so much been out recently on Abbey Road Studios in London, and they had the panels that tilted out of the wall, and you could spin them this way and spin them that way, and one side was hard, and one side was soft. Okay. And you could baffle the room as you went.
To isolate things as much as you can, or maybe it makes things more lively in the room.
Right, or less lively.
Yeah.
So anyone's done any serious recording as a musician in a studio, you realize you have a lot of downtime.
While you're waiting for each person to do their part.
To do their thing, right.
Yeah.
Or you're waiting for playbacks, or you're listening to playbacks. So you get to spend a lot of time in the control rooms. So I would spend my time in the control room instead of sitting on the sofa smoking cigarettes. I would spend my time looking over the engineer's shoulder and see what he was doing and the tape machines and all that kind of stuff.
Whether you're a local music fan or a creator looking for professional sound, I want to show you what we have to offer here at Chesler Sound. First, check out our latest releases. We're constantly updating our library, and you can stream new music from our featured artists right from the site. We make it easy to support independent artists with flexible options that put the control in your hands. Visit the shop for exclusive gear and unique items to help you represent the Chesler Sound community. If you're a creator, my private studio offers high-quality professional audio support for your next music, film, or podcast project. Interested? Visit us at cheslersound.com to listen, shop, or start your next project. Now, when I was interning at Jupiter Recording Studios, I remember always kind of like, my favorite part was being right there looking over their shoulder and being like, all right, like, what are you guys doing to make this work? You know, I mean, different setting in regards of, you know, is hip hop and rap was more their speed than per se television broadcast and jazz music and more live instrumentation. But the hardest part for me was trying to figure out, well, how do I take that home? You know, I know you found a way, but what was your steps, especially in an era that doesn't have, like, you can't just go, let me get a digital console or a digital interface.
Right. So of course we're working all analog. We're working on tape. First time I saw a 16-track 2-inch tape multi-track was, you know, scratching my head. Was an amazing piece of technology. But back then, studios were expensive, and you're paying for, just like you do now, you pay for studio time by the hour. So the faster you can work, the less you have to pay, but the faster you work doesn't necessarily mean you get the best product. So to try to find somewhere in between of being able to do your best work at a reasonable cost, in the probably in the 80s, especially the mid 80s, home studio gear started getting reasonably priced.
Okay, because I was thinking at that range that things were still pretty expensive at that time, but it was starting to get into like, oh, and was it advertising it to more your home studio kind of realm?
Well, they were dumbing it down a little bit.
Okay.
The brand of equipment that I was most familiar with for home studio stuff was Tascam.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a 16-track multi-track, Tascam came out with one on 1-inch tape instead of 2-inch tape.
Groundbreaking at the time.
Yeah. And they also came out with a 8-track multi-track on 1/4-inch tape.
Okay.
So this gear was starting to get pretty reasonable in price. And also, when you're feeding a tape machine, especially you're feeding 1-inch tape or 2-inch tape, reel of tape gets real expensive. I think at the time it was $50 a reel for my 1-inch machine. And at 15 IPS.
Inch per seconds for those that don't understand.
Yeah, you get 30 minutes of recording on a $50 reel of tape.
Okay. All right.
That still can get expensive too.
Yeah, way cheaper now.
The other thing is the size of all the gear, but and rack mount gear. Rack mount gear started getting reasonable, and they were coming out with specific rack mount stuff for home studios.
Okay.
So I was able to, over a period of a couple of years, I was able to accumulate a good set of gear. I was able to find a board and a 16-track recorder that were designed to go together.
I love it because, like, I can't tell you compatibility is still an issue, especially with the digital realm. You don't know what you're going to get. Like having this device communicate with this, they're different brands, they're different chips, and yeah, not all the time it's a easy sync. Sometimes you have to really finesse what parameters you have to get that streamlined communication between the two devices.
With analog gear, you're really only working with two types of signals. On the inputs, you're working with high impedance or low impedance or line level, and then on the output, you're working with balanced line or unbalanced line. So you really don't, and all those were designated by voltages and impedances and stuff. And so a balanced line off of this machine theoretically was calibrated the same as a balanced line off of this other machine. So there were really no compatibility issues as long as you were plugging them in the right spot.
And just to clarify on the levels and whatnot, you have basically like low impedance, like a mic level, which is going to have fairly low level. Then you have an instrument level that's going to be a little bit higher. That's going to be your high impedance. And that's going to be like your guitars and stuff like that. And then you have your line level, which is kind of what mixers typically will send out to an amp or a recording device, whatever it may be. I'm just saying that for the folks out there that might not know.
And back in the day, it was either an XLR plug, a 1/4-inch jack, or an RCA jack. Yeah. And that was your 3, so you're...
Yeah, well, now you got digital, so you got CUSB and all those variations. And fun. I think another thing, too, that I thought was a fun comparison between analog and digital is couldn't really just edit on the fly. Like back then, if someone was like, oh, yeah, I'll just edit that while we track this recording, you'd be like, what are you talking about? You know, like you can't, it's running on the reel. You can't be editing it while it's running. Did you end up editing a lot with your 16-track tape, or were you more in the mindset of you better come and get it right?
You've always got some editing. If you're recording a song's too long, maybe you got to decide to throw out a verse or something. So what I would do would be edit the 1/4-inch tape, and when I say edit 1/4-inch tape, cut and splice, razor blade and splice tape.
Yeah.
But very seldom did I cut and splice the 16-track. Figuring that kind of like, archive tape, okay, it's here, we're going to mix the whole thing down, and then we're going to take the 1/4-inch tape and we're going to cut that into what it needs to be. If you need to rearrange a section.
Gotcha.
Certainly a lot different than you do now, and somewhat time consuming. I got pretty good at it and real fast at it. You don't do nearly as much in music recording as you do in voiceover work.
True. It's a lot easier to edit voice than music because you don't have as much information to give away your edit.
But you have a whole lot more edits because somebody's saying, oh, I messed that up, take 2, take 14, and all you're doing is trying to get a 5-second voiceover line.
Yeah.
Of course, sometimes you can just use that take off the multitrack to master. But many times, one session I did was 4 voices, and it was all speaking, and they're speaking over at the same time they're reading a 4-person script.
And it's just on a 2-track?
They're all on their own tracks.
At least you got that working for you.
Voice number 2 might mess up their line, and voice number 3 comes in and gets their line before voice number 2 says, oh, I messed that up. So, yeah. There's some of that can be done on just what you transfer off the multitrack to the master, but sometimes you have to take a piece of master and you have to put it in between.
Yeah, I took an analog class when I was studying for audio production, and one thing that I thought was very fun is when you edit in tape, like before you start, they start you in digital. So when you're starting off with that, they tell you, oh, crossfade, you're always crossfade, always fade, always crossfade. And then they don't really necessarily, might not tell you immediately why that is per se. You know, they do mention, oh, so it doesn't pop your speakers or whatnot. But I thought it was interesting when I was doing the editing on analog. When you edit, you always edit at an angle. You rarely edit just straight down the line, and that's to do a natural crossfade between the two lines. And I thought that was like the coolest thing in the world. It's like, so that's how it goes. Granted, now you can adjust the spline of the fade and make it you can do all sorts of stuff, I guess. But I just like how much of the digital is reflected with the analog, you know. So you started with analog, and you've had all this experience on analog gear, but you were also at the beginning of the digital age with audio. When those devices and that technology came out, what were your thoughts on that technology? Did you embrace those changes?
The first thing that studios, not just home studios or independent studios, even the big boys, the first digital technologies that they brought in was for mastering.
Okay.
So the multi-tracks and everything was still put together on analog tape, but then especially for stereo mastering that you do in music audio, you would be mixing down to 2-track. Normally we'd be mixing down to 2-track 1/4-inch tape. Well, when DAT machines came out, we could mix down to digital audio tape. And then you've got your master tape in the digital realm.
Okay.
The first sessions that I ever did mixing to DAT, we actually rented a DAT machine from a music store.
Oh, okay.
And got to learn and got to play with it, School of Hard Knocks, so to speak. But it was really a big change off of mixing down to 2-track 1/4-inch tape.
Yeah, you probably felt like you could maybe do it a few more times without degrading the medium.
yeah, that and just the fact that it was a 2-rack space unit. The tape was smaller than a pack of cigarettes, and once you got it in the machine, the professional machines would have digital outputs. The next thing that came along was CDRs.
Yeah.
And that was even better because a digital audio tape still rewinds. It's still tape. So if you're wanting to hear a replay again, you want to hear that playback again, or you want to fast forward to another or back to another song, you're still waiting for tape to track. Yeah. Now, they didn't go real fast, but then CDRs came along, and that changed. So that changed again. I remember I had a conversation with an engineer at Tascam one time about about how long DAT tapes would last. Mm-hmm. The technology was young enough that he didn't know.
Yeah.
I called him and I said, how long are these DAT tapes going to last? He was, well, technology's only been out a few years. We don't know yet.
I feel that. And for those that don't know, it is digital audio tape is what DAT stands for.
It's a smaller than a cassette. Yeah. It's magnetic tape inside, and it's storing digits instead of storing sound. Very similar to what we also learned later, VCRs.
Okay. I always thought that was the same kind of method as like a cassette tape.
A VHS tape is a digital storing device. It has the rotating head.
Oh, you're totally right.
Yeah, so we even used VHS machines for 2-track mastering at times.
You know, I've heard of that as more of like get like an 80s sound kind of thing. I've heard folks trying to use like a VHS style mastering. But now I never realized that. I always thought it was still like film tape with just the audio. Granted, I don't know video stuff. It's an audio podcast, not a video podcast. But yeah, no, that's awesome. And as you embraced all these changes and everything, did your gear relatively stay the same and it was just the mastering side that changed?
In my studio, it was just the mastering side that changed. And still all your same analog gear, all your effects processors and your mixers and your microphones, everything on the front end would still be the same.
Yeah.
It was just on the back end. So you're either mixing to DAT tape or you're mixing the CDRs. And then you're no longer mixing to cassette tape for demos. Now you're transferring to CDRs. Did
you ever have a CDR printer or like recorder essentially?
I've been through many CDR recorders. I've had about probably 4 of them. I still have one that kind of works.
When you give it the right...
Yeah, you have to feed it very specific discs.
Fair.
There's one disc that it'll still take. Everything else that spits out.
It's funny how all those niche audio devices go.
So one more thing I'd like to add about the mastering and the duplicating of especially music in home studios is you've got to remember your playback source and what your audience is going to be playing it back on.
Know your references.
And that has changed over the last 50 years. That has changed so much. In the 60s, we're playing back 12-inch vinyl or 7-inch singles on turntables with needles. I won't even get into 8-track tapes because that's something in the audio business that everybody wants to just forget.
That's fair.
Then it became cassettes. So when you're mixing down or mastering or recording for a client, we used to run a parallel cassette mix at the same time.
To know what it would sound like.
And then we would either put it on a boombox or take it out to a car.
Yeah.
Because at that time, most of your music was being listened to in cars on cassette players.
That's common. Yeah, that's still a thing today.
Where is it today when people are listening to their music online?
Yeah.
And even in cars, we've all heard the boom, boom, booms going down the road, but you could have pretty impressive stereo systems in cars.
Yeah.
And of course, in homes, big speakers. Now, things are either coming out of little speakers on a laptop, or if you've got some little speakers on your desktop, or earbuds.
Yeah, all of it.
You know, especially your frequency responses, which are going to affect your mix. Your mixes are completely different than what they used to be. So you may be mixing off of a nice set of studio monitors, but what's that going to sound like when the person puts in the earbuds?
So that's actually, I think, the hardest thing to understand with audio. Not maybe to understand, but to like fully grasp is the idea of your references and building up a reference and what that sounds like. So from very start to end, there's so many variables of references. There's the reference of what the guitar tone, just from guitar to printing, So what does the guitar sound like? All right. What's that sound like? What device are you using to record it in? What character is that gonna add to the signal? What are you gonna add in the mixing process in the digital realm or analog realm, whatever mixes you do then? And then that's in reference with the speakers, which is in a reference of the room, which I didn't even get into the room recording, So then it's not only what your room sounds like, what your speakers sound like, what your audio file sounds like, and there's so many variables in play that you do have to get a consistency of, okay, I do know what these sound like. Now I can imply what it's going to do from these different mediums. But no, anytime I master, I always go from I of course, do it from here, but then I reference it to my earbuds, Bluetooth earbuds. I do phone speakers, straight out of the phone speaker. Car listen.
Yeah, of course, I forgot about phone speakers.
Yeah, because a lot of people just walk around with that full blast, which pet peeve of mine is just when someone plays that out loud, just walking by. But that's an audiophile thing. But no, it's absolutely a mess of references.
A good engineer can make anything sound good in the studio.
Yeah, a great one though.
But a great one can make it sound really good in earbuds or little laptop speakers or whatever.
And it might not sound good in the studio then, because you have to overcompensate what those mediums are lacking.
And I didn't have to deal with all that because we had home stereos and car stereos, and that was it. Yeah. And generally speaking, there wasn't a whole lot of difference there. Maybe bass response.
Well, and we live in an age of convenience now. So back then, you kind of folks. Correct me if I'm wrong. I wasn't alive then, but from my understanding, folks were more entitled to get a higher quality listening device because it was like an experience, You got the table, you got the record out, you went to listen to it, and you chose the song maybe you want to listen to, or the whole EP and album. Well, now it's Alexa, play XYZ playlist, and then it plays a whole playlist of music you want to hear.
Your stereo was a bragging point. And car stereos too. We all put big high power cassette stereos in our cars. There was no car stereo, factory car stereo that was good enough or big enough. But they got way bigger after that. But so that's something that you've got to keep in mind. Is what the playback is. It's very important.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It's imperative in audio to know playback and like just what your things sound like.
On our next episode, we will be continuing our conversation with Larry Gregory, where we talk about what skills transfer from the studio to live sound and how they differ, and what it's like being a producer.
All right, so like and subscribe so you know when the next episode will come up. And until then, keep listening to the sounds around you.